Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're doing my July wrap up. I read 26 books in July, which is still a lot, but it's I think the least amount of books I've read in all of my wrap ups so far. But that thought alone is a little bit insane because 26 books a month, guys. Am I for real? Anyways, we're gonna go through and talk about all the books that I read, what I rated them and what I thought. And most of these, if not all, were read in reading vlogs. So I'll leave all the relevant reading vlogs down below if you want to go and watch me read the books if you haven't already. If you're new here, hi, welcome, my name is Emmy. Make sure you subscribe because we like to read a lot over here. I had quite a diverse month compared to my other reading months because I read a lot more contemporary romance as I was filming some reading challenges. But I do primarily, typically, read fantasy books. We're actually going to start with my favorite read of the entire month, which might be a bit surprising because I don't think that reading vlog goes up next. I think after this video, when this has gone live, the next reading vlog you're going to get is this one. So, little spoiler. I read all the Magnolia Parks books. And it was my favorite read of the month. It is a 5-star series. It is going to be my Roman Empire and I cannot stop thinking about it. You guys have already watched me read the first Magnolia Parks book in my reading 7 romance books in 7 days video. I ended up filming a whole reading the Magnolia Parks universe series book vlog. So it has been a very emotional week and a half for me reading all of the books. I'm absolutely obsessed. It is a 5-star series. My individual rating for each book varies, but it's just so good. I immediately need to go out and buy Magnolia Parks merch. I can't stop thinking about it. The temptation alone to go and get a tattoo for the book series. I don't need to, but I really want to. If you haven't heard of the Magnolia Parks series, please go and add these to your TBR. They're so good. With the book series, there's Magnolia Parks books and then there's Daisy Hates books. Every other book is either a Magnolia or a Daisy, but pretty much Magnolia Parks and Daisy Hates happen in the same timeline, but it's split into 2 different groups. Point of views. Apparently you can read these books in tandem, which is a fun thought because they happen at the same time, but there are completely different subplots happening. The overall plot is Magnolia Parks is a socialite, right? She is a millionaire, she is very wealthy, she lives in London, she's one of London's elites and she loves fashion, and she had a toxic relationship and you're following her and her life and her ex and her group of friends while she's navigating love and drama and betrayal and heartbreak. Daisy Hates, it runs in the same circles as Magnolia Parks, but this is more of mafia vibes, London gangs, rich underground London criminals, but they run in the same circles. So there's crossovers. You get 2 point of views in Magnolia Parks, you get Magnolia and BJ, and then in Daisy Hates you get 3 point of views and you get Daisy and Julian Hates and Christian. And Christian in this book is best friends with Magnolia and in that same group of friends. So much fun, lots of drama, lots of crossover. Then you have Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home and Daisy Hates The Great Undoing. And I do have to say, if you're gonna read the Magnolia Parks books, you can't just read Magnolia Parks book 1 and then decide it's not for you and put it down. You have to read Daisy Hates books because it's the same story. These 2 books are basically one book in my head. Same with these 2 books, they're basically just one book. I don't really need to go into all this detail about the books, but there are 3 Magnolia Parks books, there are 2 Daisy Hates books out and 2 more to come, but this is the last Magnolia Parks book and it came out this year and I absolutely sobbed my way through this. I'm not a tabber or an annotator and I was highlighting pages, I was underlining pages. I am so ridiculously obsessed. I started out with book 1 saying I hated everyone and everything and I ended book 5 being absolutely in love with everyone and heartbroken and miss it and so obsessed with this series. I don't know what to read now. I feel like I'm gonna go into a reading slump in August because of these books. Anyways, we're moving on because I want you to actually watch that reading vlog when it comes out. I feel like this month for me was a lot of 3.5 and a lot of 3.75 books. I don't know what it is, just nothing was really hitting. The romance books were hitting harder for me, but I read Sorcery of Thorns. This was really sweet. It was very cozy fantasy vibes. It's a YA fantasy with a really interesting magic system, but I just don't think cozy fantasies are my favorite. I'm really glad I read this. I think the writing was really beautiful. I read it in a reading vlog. I really enjoyed it. I just think that I prefer a much more fast-paced, higher stakes fantasy. I need to really get invested in a story and the characters. So this for me was 3.5 stars. I would recommend it. I would say if you like cozier fantasy vibes like Divine Rivals, then this is probably a story that you will really love. It's focuses more on the main character and her story progression and the magic system and the plot with like a tiny bit of romance, but this isn't like a romantasy, but still very sweet. I read The Witch Collector because I've seen so many people like rave about this on TikTok, and I do love a story about witches, so I picked it up. For starters, it's such a big paperback. Like, this is a normal paperback size. Why is it so much taller? I don't know. It's like tall and thin. It's only like 350 pages. This book costs like £18. So I will be continuing the series, but I'm just gonna download them on Kindle. The first half of this book I really loved. I thought it could be like 4 stars upwards, but the second half kind of lost me, and I don't know exactly what it was because there wasn't like a huge plot twist or change or anything that could have changed things. I just started to get a little bit bored. I don't know, I wanted a bit more. But apparently book 2 is like crazy and is so much better. So I am gonna keep reading this series, but right now I'm like unsure. If you're looking for a witchy story, you might really like this. I'd recommend reading it. I wouldn't say don't not read it, but I would say 3.75 because I just really loved the first half of the book, and then the second half was a bit meh. Like, I wasn't running to want to go and pick up the next book, but I do want to read it, just it's not like a priority. The Foxglove King, another 3.75. I really like this. This was giving me early Throne of Glass books, like the actual Throne of Glass book, Throne of Glass, but with like darker gothic fantasy. It says in this gilded gothic and darkly romantic new epic fantasy series. I'm gonna say straight off the bat, not heavily romantic. I would say like we get like a teaser of a potential slow burn, but romance was barely even a subplot in this. It was more of just like a vibe. It was very plot driven, and I did think it was really interesting. The ending kind of surprised me. I didn't think that that was gonna happen like straight away, and I am interested to read on and see what happens next. But like even after finishing it, I'm not like actively thinking about this book a lot. So I would say 3.75. I feel like it's got like a lot of potential again, and book 2 could be where it really picks up, but it was very easy to read. And I do love a gothic fantasy. The Beasts of the Briar series. There are 3 books out so far, 4th one is coming. I literally just did my TBR video and said I was gonna read Forged by Malice this month in August, and I actually read it right at the end of July because I ran out of books to read and was like, I kind of just want to like read something easy. So I picked this up. I do have to say, guys, book 3 kind of lost me. Look at the size difference. This is book 1. I think book 1 was a really good size. Book 2 is huge as it was, but book 3 is even bigger. There is no need for this book to be this big. Book 1 for me was a 3.5 stars. Book 2 was a 3.75 star. Book 3 was a 2.5 star. Now, the first book is Bonded by Thorns, and it is a reverse harem. So, not my favorite premise, but still like, why choose when you can have 4 princes? So it is like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but with 4 princes. There was nothing in this book that shocked me because it was a fairy tale reimagining. Like, we already knew how the story goes, we know what happens, you know what's coming, so it is quite predictable. The writing style in this is an adult book. It is very adult, it is a bit graphic, it is really spicy. It gets spicier as the books go because it is a reverse harem, right? But the writing style honestly threw me off. I feel like I'm reading like a Disney story. Like, it feels like it should be a YA. The writing is quite young, very whimsical, over the top, magical, fairy tale, Disney vibes. But then you flip the chapter and it is graphic, spicy scenes. It's so hard to describe. Like, I have my bias on who I like. If you're interested, it's Keldarian and Caspian. The main female character kind of annoys me. While there is like a really interesting fantasy world and like magic system in here, I don't really care for it, and everything just feels a bit superficial. Is it a very easy read? Yes. Oh my god, yes. If you want something that you don't need a lot of brain power to use, more of a romance reader who loves Beauty and the Beast and Disney stories and stuff, then yeah, this. Would I actively recommend it? No, I don't think I'd be shouting about these books and telling everyone to read them. I think it's for a specific demographic though, I think that's why. And I know a lot of people love these and enjoy these. I do enjoy them, and I am most likely gonna read the rest of the books that come out in this series, but it's not my favorite. There is way too many characters in this for me. I feel like 60% of this book could have been edited down. The ending though, the ending saved this book. The ending was insane, and I do want to read on, but if I DNF'd books, I probably would have DNF'd book 3 in this series so far, so that's what I'm gonna say. I found my new favorite romance author Abby Jimenez. I read Part of Your World. It was my first Abby Jimenez book, and this was a 5-star for me. I loved this book so much. I still think about it like every day, like parts of this book and this plot. I read it on Kindle, and then I had to get a physical book because I am going to want to reread it, and I did really love it. And Daniel is everything. So good. I also read Beach Read in this, which was my second Emily Henry book because I read Happy Place last month. Happy Place was a 5-star read for me because I cried. It was very emotional. I really love Emily Henry's books. They feel more like women's fiction with romance in it rather than like a romance story, because there is such a distinct like main subplot that happens throughout the story that's related to the romance, but it isn't the romance. Do you know what I mean? I feel like if you've read the books, you get what I'm saying. But like there is an actual plot that happens in this book as well as the romance. Like the whole story isn't just the romance. And I really enjoyed that. This for me was a 4.5 stars. I really did love it. I read The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This was my third Ali Hazelwood book. I've given every Ali Hazelwood book I've read 4 stars, and this falls into the 4-star Ali Hazelwood category for me. So that's Bride, Not in Love, and The Love Hypothesis I've read by her. All very different books of hers, but it was 4 stars for me. I did really like it. I love the way that Ali Hazelwood writes her characters and describes them. I think they're really fun. And I had so much fun reading this. And I want to read more Ali Hazelwood books. I think I'm going to eventually get through all of her books. I read a YA rom-com. This is Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter, and I wasn't sure how a YA romance would go because typically like the YA romance books that I have come across are all typically like high schoolers and like school and young love, and I don't really care for that. Like I can't connect to a child, you know? I don't really want to relive high school years. But being like a rom-com movie lover, this was everything. This was so much fun. I couldn't stop giggling. I loved all the huge rom-com inspiration and references. I'm a little bit obsessed with Wes and Liz, and I have been told that there is a second book coming out this year, which is a continuation from this book. Now I have to say, I read the blurb of like what happened and of what that book is about and what sort of happened, and it seems realistic of what would actually happen in real day, but I'm not happy about that. But I feel like I need to read book 2 when it comes out. This was 5-star for me. This, I was giggling so much. Heartless by Elsie Silver. This is my third Elsie Silver read. I read Wild Love and also Flawless, the first book in the Chestnut Spring series. This is book 2 in the Chestnut Spring series. I immediately want to go pick up book 3, so I'm probably going to do that this month. I'm just gonna practically just reading one Elsie Silver book a month, just making my way through. This was so easy to read. I read this in a day. I feel like the Chestnut Springs series is introducing me to a lot of like typical romance tropes that I haven't read before. Like this has a single dad trope, and I don't really care about kids in books, nor did I think I'd like a single dad trope, but it turns out I love a single dad trope. I love Cade so much. I love the dynamic between Cade and Willa. I love the way that Elsie Silver writes different types of characters, and just thinking about this book now makes me want to go and pick up the next one. And then Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. Such an emotional read for me. I cried at the ending, and this was the book that made me think that romance readers are masochists, because this hurt to read. This was so sad. There was just parts of the book that I had issues with. This was a 4-star for me. It was really good, and I would recommend it if you're looking for like an emotional romantic read. The characters were known for being a certain type of way. There were certain plot points or parts in the book where they just didn't act like that. They acted different. And I'm like, if this specific thing is integral to this character and this is how they act and how they think and how they communicate, then why aren't they doing that with each other? I started Trial of the Sun Queen. I read book 1 and I read book 2. This I think is like described as Hunger Games meets The Bachelor, and book 1 definitely has that. A lot of people compare it to The Selection, like an adult version of The Selection. I've not read The Selection, so I can't compare it to it, but if it is anything like The Selection, it kind of makes me want to go and read The Selection. Book 1 was really fun. We had 2 character point of views, but the characters didn't really meet until later on, so that we had 2 type of subplots going on, and at the end of the book things started to come together, and I really enjoyed that. It kept things like interesting, like, oh, what's happening in this part of the world and what's happening in this part of the world, and you're waiting for the characters to meet up. There's a build up, there's like tension, and then they meet for the first time. I really thought the plot was fun in book 1. Book 2, I would say, becomes a lot more character driven. It's heavier on, you know, the 2 main characters and their sort of dynamic and relationship with one another. And book 2 was 3.5 stars for me. I do want to read book 3, and I'm going to read book 3, and I'm hoping that how we ended book 2 is going to pick up more of the interesting plot in book 3 because I missed the plot, I missed the fun, the action, the drama. I caught up to date with the Blood and Ash books. So I read book 4 and book 5. Book 4 is The War of Two Queens. This was actually my favorite Blood and Ash book. I think I prefer it to book 1, or like at least love it the same. So this was 4.25 stars for me. I just love the Drakens. They're my favorite thing ever. Like the stage that we are in this book compared to book 1 is insane when you think about it, like what has happened and how many new characters and things have been revealed. I just think this is so good. I do think book 2 and 3 in the Blood and Ash series does drop and a lot of people lose interest at that point, but I do think it's so worth it to get to book 4 because this was so good. And then book 5, A Soul of Ash and Blood. This I don't think added much plot at all. This was just basically book 1 retold from Castiel's point of view. So we find out what was happening in his head and how he felt throughout all of book 1. It's just a retelling essentially. And I don't think it added anything to the plot necessarily, but I do love Cass. And I really enjoyed his point of view. I thought it was just like a fun read to still live in this world a bit. So that was 3.75. And I read those books in tandem with the Flesh and Fire series. So A Light in the Flame is book 2 in Flesh and Fire. This was 5 stars for me. I loved this just as much as I loved A Shadow in the Ember. And I'm obsessed with the Drakens. I love the Drakens so much. They're one of my favorite parts of the books. I thought that this was so much fun. I really, really loved this. And Flesh and Fire is one of my favorite book series ever. I'm obsessed with Nyktos. Love him so much. I do feel like this is a filler book. I feel like the general consensus of people being like a bit annoyed about this one is completely valid, but for me personally, it was a 4 star for me because I just love the characters so much. I believe in the characters. I will probably read anything about these characters in this world. It's not a 5 stars. I really missed the Drakens. I read Quicksilver. I read it on Kindle and then I had to get this cover version of it on Amazon because it's just so beautiful. Like, look at this. I also did not realize how big the book was. I got it because I just read it on Kindle and in my mind, Kindle's just like a piece of paper. So I was like, oh, it's really not that big. This is a big book. And I blasted my way through that. I feel like this is the fantasy book of the month. This is the fantasy book that everyone's talking about, that's raving about. Everyone's reading it. Everyone knows about it, so I don't need to sit here and tell you what it is about. But for me, it was a 4.75 star. I can't believe it was Callie Hart, the author, her debut fantasy book. She hadn't written fantasy before. I think the magic system was so unique. I've spoken about this book already in so many of my videos. I do think it's worth reading. I think if you like more like political fantasy with an interesting magic system and like a slow burn enemies to lovers type of thing, then like yeah, so I really enjoyed Quicksilver and I cannot wait for more books to come out in that series. But I think my favorite fantasy read of the month, which is potentially like a 6-star read for me, is A Touch of Golden Madness. This is the author's debut. It's a debut book. It gives 6-star vibes. It's definitely top 10 favorite fantasy books that I've read. It is a new release. It was available on Kindle Unlimited, but I think that this book was just so good. It's action-packed. I couldn't put it down. One of my favorite reads of the year. A really interesting magic system. It was dystopian and fantasy, set in like some post-apocalyptic world with like proper enemies to lovers. I feel like if you enjoyed Quicksilver, you'll probably like A Touch of Golden Madness. If you like those kind of fantasy books, then yeah. If you like the same kind of fantasy books as me, please read this. Add this to your TBR. And we are going to be getting more books in this world and in this series. There's also going to be like a prequel series. So the next book that's coming out is actually a prequel book, because when you get all the way to the end of A Touch of Golden Madness, there are so many big plot twists and things that happen in that book, and the next book we're getting is kind of telling us how we got to where we are. I really like the characters and I can't wait to keep reading. The prequel book I believe is coming out, what, like December? End of the year. So I'm so excited that I don't have to wait too long to get like another book in this world. But yeah, 5-star read for me. Obsessed with it. The final book that I read is Gold by Raven Kennedy. This is the 5th book in the Plated Prisoner series, and the 6th one comes out next month, Goldfinch, and then that will be the Plated Prisoner series complete. I read Glow, which was book 4, and for me that was a transitionary type of book. I felt like it was setting us up for what was to come because the plot had kind of changed at that point and we were starting to go in like a bit of a different direction. So I had high hopes that this would start to pick up again and have a bit more action. And I have to say I was a little bit disappointed in it. It was a 3.75 read for me because I did enjoy it and I do love our characters, but I just wanted more. I feel like I felt the same way about this as I did Glow. I think these books are so easy to read, like they're printed really large. I don't know what it is about Play the Prisoner, but I can read these in hours. I really love, you know, the overall story, the characters. I just wasn't a massive fan of the plot direction in this book and where it was going. And I also don't really care for fantasy books where main characters get separated for the book. They're not really together. I feel like we can't really progress with the story because it's like, okay, well, we're waiting for them to come back and then things will happen. I felt like individually things weren't really happening again, but I am hoping that it is setting up for what's going to come in the final book. I really have high hopes because book 2 and book 3 in this series were so good. I'm interested to see where it goes. I really am holding out hope. And they are the 26 books that I read in the month of July. Again, like I said, I'll leave the links for reading vlogs where I read most of these books down below. And if you've made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching and sitting here and listening to me yap on and on about all the books I read. I'm hoping to do a bit more reading in August, to be completely honest. We're jumping back into fantasy because obviously I had a lot of contemporary romance and other genres this month, but I am missing my fantasy books. And if you watched my TBR video where I picked my TBR for August, we've got some good fantasy reads to come. So again, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.